Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar for veterinary practitioners. My name is Zoltán Kunsági, and I work in the antimicrobial resistance team at the European Medicines Agency's Veterinary Medicines Division. I will chair this webinar with Rens van Dobbenburg, President of the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe. This is actually the second webinar organized jointly by the EMA and the FVE to raise animal health professional awareness on key topics related to the implementation of the veterinary medicinal products regulation. Focus of today's webinar is about EMA's categorization of antibiotics for veterinary use in the European Union and its implications for animal health professionals. As we all know, antimicrobial resistance is a top global public health concern. We are losing treatment options. EMA plays a very important role in the global response to the threat of antimicrobial resistance by supporting the development of new medicines and treatment approaches, collecting veterinary antimicrobial consumption data to guide policy and research, and this is I would like to underline for today's meeting, promoting responsible use of existing antibiotics. The event will include a presentation of the categorization of antibiotics for veterinary use and its impact for veterinarians and insights on practitioners' perspective. I was also asked to give you some few housekeeping messages. So first of all, please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on EMA's YouTube channel in the next weeks. If you do not agree with attending a recorded session, we unfortunately have to ask you to leave. After each presentation, you may raise your hand to ask questions to the speakers. In the interest of time, we may not be able to take all the questions. However, during the question and answer section, you will be able to ask additional questions to a multi-stakeholder panel. While you are not talking, thank you for muting your microphone for a better audio experience. Okay, I would like now to give the floor to Dr. van Dobbenburg, President of the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, for his introduction. Thank you.
And thank you, Zoltán. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. My pleasure on behalf of the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, FVE, to open together with Zoltán this webinar on the AMEG categorization of antimicrobials. This is already the second webinar in a row. FVE co-organizes in excellent collaboration with EMA. We thank you for that. For those who are not aware, FVE as a federation represents more than 300,000 veterinarians in 39 countries, covering all veterinary disciplines across Europe and tries to be the voice of the vet profession. Today, we have a topic of huge importance on the table, especially for veterinarians. The categorization made by AMEG of antimicrobials, from prudent to avoid, in 4 steps. Also from first choice to last choice. The latter one even may not use at all because spare for use in humans. FVE welcomes the work done by AMEG. Of course, at the same moment, we hope the transposition to the member states will not lead to a stricter regime in some countries. Availability of antimicrobials for animals is essential. Remember that the few new antibiotics, which we may foresee in the future, by definition will be reserved to treat humans and not animals. We have to do with the current ones and have to ensure they stay effective. Veterinarians can't do their work without antibiotics. FVE is the opinion that in principle each animal suffering from a bacterial disease should be able to receive the right antibiotic treatment. This is not only for the sake of animal health and welfare, an animal is a sentient being with an intrinsic value, but also for the sake of public health, because people can get sick of bacteria transmitted from animals. Veterinarians aim to prevent diseases in animals, So antimicrobials will not be needed that much. Remember, prevention is better than cure. And as less as possible, but as much as needed. For example, by official controls on farm level, by using vaccination, by establishing external and internal biosecurity. But even animals held under the most ideal circumstances with the best housing, feeding, climate and robust genetics can get sick sometimes. From the moment we realized the problem with AMR, European vets felt part of the solution, combating this problem. By skipping antibiotic growth promotion, by conditioning the use of critical important antibiotics, for example by sensitivity testing, by restricted use, by antibiotic policies, as the AMEG categorization today. In less than a decade, the antibiotic sales at the animal side decreased with a third across 30 European countries. And that's not all. The new VMP regulation will further support responsible use by strengthening the position of the vet prescription, by prohibiting prophylactic use, by stepping over from collecting sales data to user data, which include over time all kept animal species. Of course, new rules lead to questions. What is practical? How to interpret the rules, etc. Discussion between all participants involved, vet practitioners, regulators and more, are needed to make the system work as good as possible. And that's exactly what we do in webinars as we have today. In the end, we all aim for the same, a safer and healthier world for animals and people and our environment. We are all connected. I think more than ever that has a special meaning coming out of the previous year. Thank you. I hand over back to Zoltan.
Thank you very much, Rens, for this nice introduction. I would like now to introduce our first speaker, Gérard Moulin, who is the chair of Antimicrobial Advice Ad Hoc Expert Group, AMEG, which prepared the advice itself. So a few words about Gérard. Gérard Moulin is the Deputy Director of the National Agency for Veterinary Medicinal Products in Fougier, France. He's involved in antimicrobial resistance work at both French, European and international level. At the European level, he was the chairman of the Committee of Veterinary Medicinal Products between 2003 and 2010. He participated or chaired a number of working groups related to antimicrobial resistance. He's currently the chairman of the AMEG and on the ad hoc groups working of the lists of antimicrobials foreseen by the new EU regulation. Gérard is involved in international work, OIE, WHO, FAO, and has participated and continued to participate to the establishment and updates of the WHO and OIE list of critically important antimicrobials. Dr. Moulin will present the categorization of antibiotics used in animals and its implications for animal health professionals. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Gérard.
Thank you very much, Zoltan. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the AMEG work. If you can move to the beginning of the presentation, please. Yeah. First, I would like to introduce the AMEG Group. The AMEG Group was created to answer to questions from the European Commission, and it was in April 2013. And what I want to highlight is the composition of this group that is composed of people experts coming from the three agencies, the EMA, the European Medicine Agency, the European Food Safety Authority, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, and also from the JACRA, that is composed of people from the three agencies. So we have people, experts coming from human and animal side. And it is quite important to highlight this because we really need to have a One Health approach in the context of antimicrobial resistance, and this was very well understood by the European Commission that now ask the three agencies to work together. Next slide, please. We started to work in 2013, and we have published the first categorization in 2014, but this was a specific approach where we only take into account the antimicrobials that met the WHO C1 criteria, so just to translate, the antimicrobial classes that were recognized as important for human health. We also had some pending assessments, so it was not a complete classification that was done. We were asked in 2015 to review a specific point following the identification of the MCR1 plasmid-borne colistin resistance gene, and we made a specific advice on this. In 2017, we had a further request from the Commission to refine further the criteria we used to consider all antimicrobial classes and to make some effort in terms of communication for the categorization. And we then published the categorization in December 2019. Next slide, please. So what are the criteria that were considered for the categorization? In black, you have the criteria that were considered in the first categorization, and in purple, what has been added. So the first criteria was, is this class authorized in veterinary medicine in the EU? The second one was the importance of the class for human medicine, but considering the EU situation. The third criteria was the risk of transfer from animals to humans, and we added in the last categorization a specific consideration to mechanism where some genes may confer multi-resistance. And we additionally consider the availability of alternative antimicrobials in veterinary medicine with lower AMR risk. Next slide, please. So we have then categorized antimicrobial into 4 categories, A to D, and all antimicrobial classes are now included. We move the first AMEG categorization has 3 categories. We have now 4 categories, and this allows a greater distinction in ranking between substances, and it prevents too many antibiotics to be placed in the highest category. Next slide. So the first category, category A, avoid, it is antimicrobials that are not approved in veterinary medicines. And to be clear, we have not made any assessment in this advice on the AMEG advice of these classes. We noted that all new antibiotic authorized for human medicine should go in this category after the publication of the categorization. And we have a recommendation that if, as there are for the majority of antimicrobials, no maximum residue limit established, this substance can be only used under the cascade in individual companion animals. And really, the cascade is to be exceptional. Next slide, please. Category B, restrict. That includes third and fourth generation cephalosporin, fluoroquinolones, polymyxins. In this category, we have antimicrobials for which we have few alternatives in human medicines, and it corresponds to the WHO highest priority CIA, critically important antimicrobials, with the exception of macrolide that we have not retained in this category. The recommendation is that they should be used in veterinary medicine when no alternative from over category C and D with less risk could be clinically effective. And especially for this category, we recommend to base the use under with performance of susceptibility testing whenever possible. Next slide. Category C, caution. Here, for this category, we have alternatives that are available in human medicine for the different indications. And there are few or no alternative in veterinary medicine from category D, so the category that we will see just now, and/or the antimicrobial select for resistance to a substance in category A for specific multi-resistance gene, for example, CFR. So clearly, there is a higher risk when you use antimicrobial from this category than if you use antimicrobial from category D. So the recommendation is that category C antimicrobial should only be used if a substance in category D will not be effective. We move now to category D, that includes the other antimicrobials. Here also we have alternative in human and veterinary medicines. These antimicrobial classes do not select for resistance to category A products, and there is a lower risk for human and animal health. So for this category, the responsible use principle apply. And as usual, unnecessary use and unnecessary long treatment period should be avoided, and group treatment restricted to a specific situation. Next slide, please. We were asked also to consider the route of administration, as the route of administration may have an important impact on the AMR risk. We have tried to include this in the categorization, but it was very complicated. So what we decided, next slide please, is to provide a ranking of the route of administration, to classify the route of administration by the decreasing or increasing risk here. Next slide, please. We tried to make some communication efforts, and we published an infographic that is available in all EU languages and that you can find on the EMA website. Next slide. Here it is, I think, an important slide. How to use the AMEG categorization. Really, the AMEG categorization aims to balance human and animal health. Really, I think that if I remember when I discussed with French veterinarians following the publication of the WHO CIA list, they told me, but yes, that's fine. I cannot use that. I cannot use this. What can I use? And I think that the AMEG categorization provides a balanced approach, taking into account human and animal health, and give some guidance for the veterinarians to choose some antimicrobials, taking into account the antimicrobial resistance risk. So it's not a full AMR risk assessment. It can be used to prioritize AMR risk, but the main aim is to be a tool to assist the development of local treatment guidelines and to assist the decision of the vet when he has to treat under the cascade. And finally, the categorization can feed the advices for the delegated and implemented acts in the veterinary medicinal product regulation, and we will come back to that in the next slide. In the new veterinary medicinal product regulation, there are two lists that are foreseen to be established. First, a list of antimicrobials that should be reserved for the treatment of certain infections in humans, meaning that they can only be used in humans and not in animals. The second list is a list of antimicrobials that shall not be used under the cascade or where they can be used under the cascade subject to certain conditions. Next slide, please. So starting with the list of antimicrobials to be reserved for humans, it is foreseen to have a delegated act that indicate what are the criteria to be kept for the designation of antimicrobial on the human reserve list. So the EMA was asked by the Commission to prepare an advice that was published in October 2019. There was a stakeholder consultation, and the draft delegated act has been published in April this year. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, what are the criteria that are proposed? And it's not very new criteria. So the high importance to human health, the risk of transmission of resistance, and the criteria of non-essential need for animal health. So the delegated act is not finally published, but we have already started to work on the implementing act. That means the list of antimicrobials reserved to humans. We received the mandate in July 2019, and we are about to finalize the work. Normally, the publication of the list should be effective by the end of this year. Next slide. With regard to the second list of antimicrobials that can be used under the cascade under certain conditions, we received a mandate in February 2020. We have worked on this, and again, we are about to finalize the advice, and for this act also, we should have a publication of the list by the end of this year. Next slide. Yes, to try to conclude, I have put in parallel the two points, AMEG categorization and the lists that are foreseen by the regulation. So the AMEG categorization, it's recommendations. It was only done for antibiotics. With regard to antibiotics authorized in humans, they were not assessed and they were put in category A. It is really a basis to take into account when drafting national guidelines or to guide the use of antimicrobials by veterinarians. With regard to the list foreseen in the regulation, so it's legislative constraints. And it concerns all antimicrobials, antibiotics, antivirals, antiprotozoals, antifungals. If an antimicrobial or an antimicrobial class is included in this list, there will be no possibility to have marketing authorization in veterinary medicine, and the off-label use will not be possible. And we have the second list where we may have some restriction of the use of antimicrobial under the cascade. But in both cases, we always try to take into account human and animal health together. So again, the One Health approach is applied here. And I think that it's my last slide, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gerard, for your presentation. Now I would like to ask everyone, because I think we still have some time for 1-2 questions before we go to the next presentation. If you have any questions from Gerard, please raise your hand and we will give you the floor. I'm also checking the chat box. You can raise your hand if you go to the participant list, and next to your name there is this small hand, and just click on it and you will be able to ask the floor. Okay, I can see one comment from a participant named Emmanuel. Do you want to ask the floor and ask this question from Gerard? Please unmute yourself. Yeah. If not,
yes. If I am on the right comment, it is indicated that we recommend in category A trimethoprim sulfamides, but I don't think it's the case because we recommend. In category A, we have only products or antimicrobials that are used only in human medicine. So I think that it's not the case. And okay. Category trimethoprim sulfamides are in category D.
Thank you, Gerald. And we should also consider that sulfonamides are important for farm livestock. So toxicity was not a specific criterion, but I can see that there is. Okay, I can see some hands already. I think first was Mate Zorik. Mate?
Muted.
Yes, you are muted. Okay, let's try Els Bruns, please. Els, the floor is yours.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. I think, well, you're probably aware of the divergent position from some of the CDMP members on aminopenicillins, which are in category D. Can you maybe explain why it is in category D? Because I agree with the divergent position of these people that I think it should be C, but maybe you can say something about that. How did it end up in D?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that we have made a distinction between aminopenicillin with beta-lactamase inhibitors that are in category C and aminopenicillin without beta-lactamase inhibitors that are in category D. So to try to take into account the potential of selection of this class.
Yeah, but even I think aminopenicillins without clavulanic acids are rather broad spectrum and also very selective for things like ESBLs that we don't want. And it's in a high category in the WHO categorization. So that's why I don't understand. But maybe I know that you have to choose somewhere, but by this one, I'm very puzzled.
Yeah, I think that it's maybe not the place to discuss the background and of the different categorizations, but it was really taken into account because in the first AMEG categorization, we have put this class in a highest category, and we have asked the EMA and the antimicrobial working party to work on it, and they provided a specific risk profile for this one that we used to make this categorization.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much as well. 1 second. Yeah, there is a question, will there be a communication with the pharmaceutical companies in the upcoming changes? Actually, this is not the purpose of this meeting. I encourage you to send your question to the email address, which we will repeat at the end, vetchange.program@emaeuropa.eu. Today, we would like to focus on the categorization of antimicrobials, but I would like to ask Gerard the question from Anna Seidel. Or Anna, do you want to ask the floor and raise your question?
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask how these lists will updated in the future. So we know from experience that antimicrobial that there will be new resistances upcoming, and so I wanted to ask, how frequently will these lists be updated?
Sorry, the sound was not very good for me. So, Don, can you?
Yes, there was a question, Gerard, about the update of the advice. So, how often will be updated? I guess maybe you mentioned the 5 years, but please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. The advice will be updated on request of the European Commission, but we indicated in the report that it should be at least every 5 years, and if you see the strategy from the CVMP on antimicrobial resistance, it is foreseen to have some revision of this list, because it is really important to take into account the changes with antimicrobials that may appear, changes that can occur in the resistance patterns.
Thank you very much, Gerard. And now I would like to give the floor to you, Rens. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zoltan. I just got a message that for a while I was not able to be seen on the screen. But I can tell you I was there all the time. I'm not a mysterious guest. I'm here live, and I hope I repaired for the moment. Dear colleagues, I like very much to introduce to you Piotr Kwisinski, a remarkable veterinarian, I can tell you, and I know him since years and call him my friend. He started a practice back in 1990 in the middle of Poland, growing out to a 140 people organization, supported by a state-of-the-art laboratory, serving farms throughout the country. He's a relentless seeker for veterinary knowledge, traveling the world and not missing any congress or possibility to meet colleagues. They always say, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. Well, here's an example. Piotr currently also is president of the Union of European Veterinary Practitioners. And of course, the title of his talk is A Practitioner's Perspective. Piotr, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rens, for your nice introduction. But first and foremost, I would like to thank Zoltan and Rens for inviting me as a presenter to this meeting. The next, please, slide. And the Federation of Veterinary of Europe represents the veterinary profession in Europe. Members of FVE are national veterinary associations or chambers, and through FVE then represents about 300,000 veterinarians from 39 countries, as Rens has mentioned. But Rens didn't say that the veterinary profession is a multidisciplinary sector, and veterinary medicine has a broad field of practice. That is also reflected within FVE, which also embraces 4 sections, each one representing a vital part of profession, namely the practitioners, the hygienists, the veterinary state officers, and the veterinarians working in education, research, as in the industry. The next, please. If you take a look at the chart representing field of employment of veterinarians in Europe, you will notice that more than half of them are practitioners. And so there is an independent organizations with international statute to represent them on the European level, which is namely UEVP, Union of European Veterinary Practitioners. Apart from national representation of veterinary chambers, UEVP includes species organizations such as FECAVA, Organization for Companion Animals Vets, FIFA, Equine Veterinarians, EAPHM, Porcine Veterinarians, or PVSG, Poultry Vets, and EAZWV, Zoo and Wildlife Veterinarians. The contact with specialist groups allows us to be close to the current problems, giving us the view from a point of a doctor working with animals on a daily basis. As we are a biggest organization within FVE, our position, our decision, our present is a voice of veterinarian through FVE. The next, please. We all agree that prevention is extremely important, but we also agree that it will not totally eliminate the need to use antibiotic treatments. Therefore, it is important to work on practical solutions to limit the use of antibiotics to a necessary level. This is something FVE is working on for quite some time, for example, by issuing leaflets or position paper, or work with other organizations, for example, like EPRUMA, European Platform for Responsible Use of Antimicrobials, which FVE is a founding member of. The next, please. Of course, Europe is not alone with the antimicrobial resistance problem. The same as antimicrobial resistance is not only a veterinary problem. Therefore, the fight should be thought on the global level, where FVE works with World Veterinary Association, as well as American and Canadian Association, etc., etc. And of course, in the spirit of One Health, FVE works with other sectors where the problem is present, that is human doctors, dentists, but also we cannot forget about the role of environment, which is part of the problem too. Through, for example, medical waste or using an antimicrobial in agriculture. The next, please. It is important to understand that FVE does not promote banning of use of antimicrobials in animals, but promotes their prudent and responsible use. I would like to underline here that the target is to reduce antimicrobial resistance, and not only to reduce the use of antibiotics. Of course, the reduction of use of antibiotics is a tool to achieve a reduction of antimicrobial resistance. In the heart of veterinary practice lies care for animal health. If the animal is sick, it is our obligation to ensure the possibility of treatment, also with use of antibiotics. And of course, it is our duty to make sure that we do our best to eliminate the need to use antibiotics by ensuring animal welfare and focusing on prevention with the help of animal health law. Next, please. The veterinarians realize that the prevention is better than the cure, as also Rens mentioned. The prevention itself covers a broad scope of issues, such as biosecurity measures, vaccination programs, or identification of threat areas. A modern veterinarian plays an active role in the management of the farm by supervising and helping to adjust the conditions on the farm, especially in the areas of production which are most prone to the risk of infection from different kinds of agents, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and others. This can be realized by performing animal health visits regularly, where all the areas mentioned in this slide can be checked. By these visits, we work towards improving the health status of animals and improving their immunological capacity. By such holistic approach, we move towards a reduction of antimicrobial use. The next, please. Here you can see a part of infographic created by EMA being an introduction to categorization of antimicrobials, as Gerald also showed it. As you can see, in the center of this graphic, there is One Health. So the idea is in line with the veterinarian's point of view, that antimicrobial resistance concerns three areas: veterinary medicine, human medicine, and environment. The next, please. But there might be some confusion, as you probably already saw, other categorizations made by WHO or OIE. WHO categorized antibiotics into three groups: critically important, highly important, and important for human health. So as you can see, their focus was on human medicine. OIE, on the other hand, also categorized three categories, calling them veterinary critically important, veterinary highly important, and veterinary important antimicrobials, taking into consideration essential substance against specific infection and lack of therapeutic alternatives, of course, from animal health perspective. So EMA's categorization combines both animal health and human health, but also take into consideration European situation regarding the susceptibility of bacteria and diseases. So it is most useful for European veterinarians, I believe. The next, please. The AMEG categorized four groups available in Europe. Group A consists of medicines which are not authorized for use of animals, or those we can use for companion animals if we do not have any alternatives in other groups. From the practical point of view, the veterinarian making a decision on treatment should start from D group. And if for some reason there is no possibility to use them, for example, lack of availability, resistance, or anything else, he should move to C group and then to B group. So we need to go from the bottom to the top. But for example, amoxicillin with clavulanic acid is in C category, but for companion animals, it is commonly used as a first choice of antibiotics. It also was a little bit moved during the discussion after the first presentation. Next, please. In order to follow this categorization, we see some questions that come from a daily working with animals. Here are some of them. In many countries, there are already existing guidelines regarding the use of antimicrobials. One of the concerns is what if these guidelines are different from AMEG categorization? This is the first question. Another question regard off-label use of a lower group antibiotics versus licensed antibiotic from higher group. What should be the priority, to use higher group or to use off-label? And connected to this is the question of how to deal with shortages of C or D groups antibiotics. Should you use higher group substance or the cascade? But in the previous presentation, we have seen that the use of label should be restricted. The next, please. Having in mind that our main goal is reduction of antimicrobial resistance, there is a ready tool that, in my opinion, is often ignored, especially in human medicine, although it is extremely effective, and I am talking about diagnostic testing. As a practicing veterinarian, I cannot imagine administering any antibiotics without performing a susceptibility test. There is no other way to use antibiotic responsibly in a flock or in a herd than to check whether the substance will be efficient against particular pathogen or not. There is already some proof that such system works. In some countries, susceptibility tests were made obligatory before administration of B category antibiotics. After some time, this resulted in a noticeable reduction of use of antibiotics from that class. Of course, this calls for standardization of the test. This system will work if the test will be fast and the result will be reliable. The next, please. In my practice, the golden rule is to use minimal inhibitory concentration. These tests contain a number of active substances in different dilutions. After inoculating the isolated pathogen on the microplate, we see which substance, but also in which concentration, caused the inhibition of growth of bacteria. On this example on the screen, we can see that 5 substances caused inhibition of growth. But it also gives us a chance to see which one of them can be used effectively in lowest possible dosage. This gives the possibility of real reduction of use of antibiotics in practice. It is also a case, and I totally understand, that in many cases, veterinarians have to manage the therapy immediately after examination of animal. And there is no time for pathogen isolation and susceptibility testing. But even in such cases, the samples should be taken and the test should be performed, even after a decision was made, in order to give the vet a chance to correct the therapy if needed. The next, please. And here is this, the best antibiotic for this particular bacteria, because this is the effect of lack of growth is the higher. So which means that the dosage should be the lowest. Next, please. FVE welcomes the categorization and other tools which help in the field of antibiotic stewardship, with a reservation that the vet must have a chance to use the expertise and the practical knowledge rather than to follow the rules blindly. The decision concerning the use of particular substance must be made taking into consideration many factors such as indication, withdrawal period, and also a route of administration. We also see and understand the necessity to use the antimicrobial as little as possible, as much as necessary. And here, a science-based approach to One Health must be strongly underlined. The next, please. Having said that, FVE is against banning of authorized antibiotics for animals, no matter what we do, it is impossible to exclude the need for treatment of animals. It is a very similar situation to human medicine, where with all these preventive measures, with very good living conditions, with healthy food, with good welfare, there are still many hospitals and they are definitely not empty. It is important that every branch of medicine uses antibiotics in a responsible way and with a science-based approach. And so, if we are supposed to treat sick animals, we need tools to do this. We also need to think that also there is a group of antibiotic reserved exclusively for human use, and there are antibiotic use both in animal and human medicine. There are no substance reserved exclusively for animal use. And be sure, there will be not healthy people if there will be not healthy animals. The next, please. To sum up, Antimicrobial resistance is not singular problem in Europe, as it is not singular problem in America or in China or wherever. With world becoming a global village, this problem becomes global, and it has to be solved globally. Because of common pathogens and that affect both humans and animals, and because we have common substance against those pathogens, and plus because humans and animals share the same environment, all our actions against antimicrobial resistance must be coordinated on these three fields, which is the basic of One Health approach. Decision makers should collaborate closely with practitioners so that the proposed solutions include all the aspects of field work and are possible to apply by all stakeholders in order to provide a workable answer to the problem rather than to create another obstacles. The next one, please. All in all, there are some notes to take home and adjustment that we need to make. We need to avoid a necessity of treatment at all possible fields by focusing on prevention and enhancing animal welfare and immunity system. This will allow us to use less antimicrobials, and if we need to use them, we must use them in a prudent and responsible way. The veterinarians are ready for the challenge ahead. There is a will to make a positive change, but we need support and cooperation from all parties involved. We have to see that human medicine and in environment sector, the same or even stronger actions are being undertaken. The next, please. We will soon be subjected to a new VMP and medicated feed legislation. All FVE information and input on the new legislation can be found on the FVE website, along with other publications that were produced as One Voice of Veterinarians. Also, a position paper on use of antimicrobials released a long time ago. The next, please. This is the last slide, and here is the poster that was sent out by FVE to all veterinarians in member countries, which explain in a nutshell what are the upcoming changes connected with the new legislation that will come in force on January 2022. This can also be found on FVE website. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Piotr, very much for this excellent presentations, explaining the FVE standpoints and also setting the scene for the practitioner's perspective. And of course, we have to look if there's some questions. And I already saw there is a question which obviously had to be raised, because when you explained, and I'll translate a little bit the question, hope I don't breach the meaning of it. You showed us the laboratory diagnostic, and you said, well, it's not only the right antibiotic I can find, but also at, let's say, the lowest possible dosage, which also supports, let's say, fighting AMR. The question is, if you use this and you set out this risk balanced against the benefit of lower overall dosage against target organisms to the, let's say, maybe the greater risk of creating AMR in the whole targeted species. How do you think we can? How do you think this is to explain? Because you go off label more or less.
Yes, but this is not like this. All 5 examples I have shown on my slide was in the category on susceptibility. So which means that we have 5 antibiotics to choose. Of course, we have to take into consideration pharmacodynamic or pharmacokinetic aspects of this. And we know where is the problem. The problem is in joints or in the lungs or, I don't know, in intestinal or whenever. But, among these 5 antibiotics, we can choose this one who will work effectively, which means that we we achieve desirable effects. So which means that we can see healthy, after duration of treatment, we will see healthy birds or sows. And we can see also some kind of smiling on the face of the owners, so which is priceless for veterinary practitioner working in the field, for example. But if you wanted to use the first one, for example, you have to use much more milligrams to achieve exactly the same effect. So this is the reason that I promote all our actions with antibiotics should be preceded by laboratory tests in order to make our therapy more targeted, not based on our knowledge and experience, but supported by laboratory tests. Thank you.
Thank you for explaining, and I've seen with my own eyes how that works in your practice. Thank you for explaining a lot. I think, Piotr, again, thank you for your excellent presentation. Very, very interesting. And I would suggest that we switch over now to the panel of 6, our 2 lecturers and 4 extra colleagues. The first thing is I'm asked to repeat the housekeeping point, which was also raised by Zoltan in the beginning, that if you want to have the floor, please take your electronic hand at the participants list. And use that to raise, so you can wait then until I give you the floor. The second thing we like to do, I see already applauding. That must be for Piotr and Gerard, I suppose. The second thing I like to do, we're going to ask for the panelists who were not in the possibility to make statements in their in a lecture. To make a 1-minute statement, and I like to ask to all 4 to give this 1-minute statement, and please stick to the time for the sake of the schedule. And as the first colleague, I would like to ask Giovanni Cadenini, which we are allowed to call Joe because his name is so difficult to pronounce for a simple Dutch veterinarian. Joe is the president of the European Association for Porcine Health Management. He also is, since last week, he's a vice president of the Union of European Veterinary Practitioners. And last but not least, he's a swine practitioner in Italy. And Joe, can I give you the floor to make your 1-minute statement, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Rens. I'm just to introduce myself. I was graduated in Parma University in 2004, and I specialized in swine pathology in 2007. And from 2007, I'm working as a swine practitioner and especially as a farm vet for some farms, but also as a consultant around Italy. I have an experience in managing pigs in farms and also in free range. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we go to the second panelist with the question to make a 1-minute statement. This is Danny Holmes, also a colleague I know since years. Danny is the vice president of the European Federation of Companion Animal Veterinary Associations, called VCAVA, a well-known organization. And privately, he's also a companion animal practitioner in Ireland. And he once also told me he did some horses also. Danny, the floor is yours for a 1-minute statement.
Yes, I am the Vice President of VCAVA. We are the Federation of European Companion Animal Veterinary Associations. We have 40 country members comprising around 25,000 veterinarians. So we do hope to speak for small animal vets when it comes to matters that are going to affect them in their day-to-day. My own interest, I've been involved with FVE in the Medicines Working Group. I lead the policy group on VCAVA on issues like this. And in my own country, in Ireland, I have been involved contributing to our own national action plan on behalf of Veterinary Ireland. And we're just currently on our second version of that to carry us through from 2021 onwards. So this is a very pertinent meeting for us. And yeah, I hope I can help.
Okay, thank you. Then we go over to Christine Schwartz. She's the chair of the CVMP Antimicrobials Working Party, and she is working at the Federal Office of Consumer Protection and Food Safety in Berlin, Germany. Christine.
Yes, thank you. Again, my name is Christine Schwartz. As you said, I work at the BWL, the Federal Office of Consumer Protection Food Hygiene in Germany. That is the German competent authority for granting marketing authorizations in veterinary drugs. I'm in the Department of Veterinary Drugs, and because I'm a veterinarian by training and a specialist in microbiology, I'm in charge of clinical assessments of antimicrobials, and I'm also involved in all resistance-related issues. Since 2015, I am a member of the AWP, and I was elected in 2019 as the chair of this group. The Antimicrobials Working Party is a working party of the CVMP, and it is in charge to provide advice regarding authorizations and the use of antimicrobials, as well as all antimicrobial resistance-related issues. So what is the link between AWP and AMEG? Our group, the AWP, has drafted several or established several reflection papers on specific classes of antibiotics that are used in veterinary medicines. And these reflection papers have been used also by AMEG to help for their categorization of the antibiotics. So in particular of relevance were the latest reflection papers that are the reflection paper on aminoglycosides, as well as the reflection paper on aminopenicillins, including their beta-lactamase inhibitors. So, and finally, to give you a little prospect of what we are going to work on in future, and which is also interconnected with AMEG, is we are going to provide an update of the already existing reflection paper on macrolides, lincosamines, and streptogamines. So the work on this update has already started. And related to the presentation of the colleague from FVE, Dr. Kowinski, we are also having taken on board for our next work plan the establishment of a reflection paper on diagnostic tests, where we are trying to address their availability and characteristics in order to improve the responsible use of antibiotics in animals. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. And then last but not least, we go to Christina. We just said Christine, and now we have Christina Grego. Christina Grego is a member of the AMEG committee, and she's working at the National Veterinary Institute in Uppsala, Sweden. Your
thank you.
Your 1 minute of fame, Christina.
Yes.
Christina.
Thank you, Piotr. I will start my countdown. I'm a veterinarian, graduated in '82. That gives you a timeline. I quite soon entered into clinical bacteriology. 1995, Sweden joined the European Union, and I switched from the university to the National Veterinary Institute, working from then only with issues related to antibiotics, covering, though, a rather broad range. One of our remits is to strive for rational use of antibiotics, which means we are an expert authority, so we try to support rational use of antibiotics. In that capacity, I've been involved in most of the Swedish policy and guideline works, both those of the Swedish Veterinary Association and those that are issued from the Medical Products Agency in Sweden. I was also, and that might be interesting, a member of an ad hoc group creating a brochure on prudent use of antibiotics for the Federation of Veterinarians in Europe in 1998. Finalizing, I've been recently the chair of the third JIACRA analysis, joint interagency consumption and resistance analysis, and Gerard was the first chair of these in this series. So with that, I hope you have many questions. And also thanks to Piotr for raising diagnostics. I have my heart in diagnostics. That's where I started, and I'm still there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. Well, there are a lot of questions on the chat already. The first thing is I would like to address a question which has been posed by Piotr in his speech, in his presentation, and this is the situation. And this is, what should vets do if national guidelines differ from AMEG guidelines? And I think maybe that's a question to Gerard. And I also would like Gerard to answer on the second part of that. If there's a B antibiotic which is licensed, while C and D is available for off-label use, what do you have to do as a vet? These are two situations which day by day can happen in veterinary practice. Can I ask you, Gerard?
So I think that the first question was about. Can you repeat maybe?
Yes, of course. Sorry, I combined two. What should vets do if national guidelines differ from AMEG guidelines?
Okay, I think that it's not a problem at all. The AMEG guidelines, it's general recommendation to feed national guidelines. So national guideline should take into account the AMEG guideline, but we discussed this during the elaboration of the report. It is not possible at the EU level to make precise guidelines. What we can make is recommendations. And I think that national guidelines take into account the national situation. So it's more near from the field. And I think that really it's up to those who create this guideline to take into account the AMEG consideration, but also the national situation.
Okay, thank you. So this was to the first part. And the second part was, and Piotr already explained about it, if there's a situation, let's say that a B antibiotic is licensed for a certain situation, while a C or D antibiotics are available, but of course then you have to go to off-label. But it should be, let's say, a more responsible choice, but it's not in the licensing.
Yeah, so I think that it's a legal problem because you have the cascade regulation, so you should use an antimicrobial where you have an authorization first. If there are no such products, then you can use the cascade. So my answer is refer to the regulation.
Okay, thank you. And I think maybe the third one is also for you. Sorry for that. And this is about review of the AMEG categorization. Will that be done on the basis of resistance patterns, etc.? This question is also asked in the chat.
Yeah, I think that, as I indicated earlier, the review will be initiated by the Commission. And we take into account all the available information. And Christina just speak about the JACRA, the Joint Interagency Consumption and Resistance Analysis, that analyze the results from the different networks, from the human side on use and resistance, and also from the vet side on use and resistance. So we have information that can feed our work. So the AMEG categorization will take into account all available information, and we have indicated quite clearly that we want to revise it at least every 5 years.
Okay, thank you for that. And other question I have is I see in the chat. I'm translating a little bit to combine questions, if you allow me. And I think maybe this is a good one for Danny to answer, being companion animal veterinarian. There's also the question of conditionally use of critical antibiotics, or maybe even always to use. Sensitivity testing before choosing and using an antibiotic. And we know in large animal, this is in a lot of countries, this is already let's say a practice which is long in place. But in companion animals, this is not the case. Although, if you look to the new legislation, over the years it will be compulsory to do. What is your view on that as a companion animal practitioner? The obligation to use sensitivity testing in companion animals, Danny? If you want to answer that.
I think at the center of this, we must remember there's a licensed qualified veterinarian under EU law, and their decision-making process is central to that is the welfare of their patients. So I think there needs to be a little bit of latitude within the regulation for the clinical opinion about what needs to be done in the short and immediate term when it comes to treating an animal. And I just don't want to see that lost in delegated acts in any way. However, in most cases, when you're not dealing with critical and urgent cases, we can almost certainly follow the AMEG regulations and move from the broad spectrum category D and possibly C antibiotics with sensitivity testing if we want to use something more specific or we're not getting results with our first line treatment.
Okay, thank you. Clear point. So you divide a little bit between, let's say, the expertise of the vet who is licensed and the guideline, the advice in using, if I understand well. You balance the two of them.
Absolutely. Okay,
great answer. Thank you very much. Because it's difficult, especially for companion animals. A question from the chat. I think I directed to Joe. There have been concerns that reduction of treatment days in food-producing animals, so also include swine, might lead to enhanced findings in slaughterhouses and too short treatment periods. Is there a risk? Do you see a risk for this, Giovanni?
I personally don't see a risk for this situation because in many cases the use of antibiotics in the past was not done only to cure the animals, but also to try to prevent disease or to not modify the condition of the animals. So in the reduction of the antibiotic use, we are working a lot on the management of the farms, and so I cannot see that we will have less healthy animals. But we are working on another perspective, so trying to have better farms and better condition for the animals, so they are more healthy and they don't need antibiotic use. But we are still treat the animal that have a lot of problems or that have a disease, but not before they have the disease.
Thank you very much.
I could answer to the question.
Very clear answer. Thank you very much, Giovanni. I'm coming back to the point I discussed at the start with Piotr and ask the question now to Christina, if she allows me, because she made a remark having a high interest in diagnosing and laboratory testing. The situation Piotr described, which for vets seems a very reasonable thing to do, that you try to find, let's say, the lowest workable dosage in order to help keeping antimicrobials effective. But let's say having the confrontation with the label, or better, the off-label. Is it feasible that in the future we will switch to these kinds of techniques and also not finding out the right antimicrobial treatment, but also the dosage of that? Is that a question which you can try to answer, Christina?
It's what in human medicine you call individualized medicine. I'm not really seeing situations with lower doses than those authorized. Many of the doses we find are a bit on the lower end, even in Sweden. When we have had discussions, the Medical Products Agency has workshops, expert workshops, where we discuss dosage and dosage deviations where they're needed. And in almost all cases where we recommend a deviation is rather upwards, such as for protein penicillin and pastorella, where the dose for calves and for pigs is recommended to be higher than the currently authorized dose. But definitely, I think coming from the PKPD perspective, because that's where I made my thesis, actually, I think these are things we must look at. Lowering is tricky because you have to know so many things, the distribution and not least the protein binding, which is not always well documented for all animal species. It's not easy to find, believe me, because we search for that in trying to set breakpoints. I do think we can make better use of MIC values, though. Things that if you have strict, sensitive, intermediate, resistant categories, we call intermediate increased exposure. If you raise the dose, it may do the trick, but please note that it's not documented. It's not always documented, so the veterinarian will have to bear the responsibility then for the adaptation in all cases. It has not been tested for safety and efficacy if you deviate. That answer the question?
So yes, for sure you do. It's a difficult question. I know, of course, and Piotr and I discussed about this point already earlier.
Could I? One thing.
Yes,
but I forgot is that one thing that we should do, I think, is to think about the treatment length. Because why are we treating 3 days in food-producing animals and 14 days, the same pathogen and similar conditions when it comes to companion animals? Say a urinary tract infection where the exposure of the bacterium is extremely high for quite a few of those first choices that we have. So if we're after cutting down the selective pressure, that is where I would go first, but it needs to be documented always, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, but I understand why you answer. And at the left side of my screen, I saw some thumbs coming by. So I think you were clear. There's another one. So it takes also, let's say, the vet taking responsibility, as Piotr has explained. This is possible, but of course there's a little bit of discussion in these 2 points, these two sides, of course. There's also, from the perspective of the veterinary practitioner, there's also another very nice question. And I would like to ask that to Christine. How do you foresee in future using combination of antibiotics besides being synergistic or not? Will this be seen as critical per se?
Yes, thank you for that question. We tend to avoid as best possible a combination of antibiotics unless it is very necessary. And there's indeed a difference between antibiotics that are combined based on a synergistic effect and those that are just combined because they broaden the spectrum of activity. So I could say from my side that we could support the synergistic effect, but it should be very well conceived if it is necessary to combine two specific substances that just broaden the spectrum of their activity, unless you have, based on an antimicrobial susceptibility testing, a result that there is need for broaden the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I was looking for a question which I have trouble to find back now, which was about polymyxins. The question was how to look about the use of polymyxins of the, I think, the A category. I have trouble finding the question back. I'm looking to Irene. It's 3 minutes before 4:30.
Thank you, Rens. I just would like to inform you that Piotr and Danny raised their hands. So I think we have time for their questions as well. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for the time. Okay, let's go first to Piotr. Piotr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rens. You know, I would like to direct my question to Gerard, because I've seen on one of your slides that the cascade is recommended to be restricted. Do you realize, for example, that in many countries, in European countries, for example, there is no any antibiotics registered for geese or for rabbits or, let's say, for moose? So we have to assume from the beginning that in this kind of production, we will use antibiotics in any case to use cascade. What do you think about this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. The first thing is that it is what we have in the legislation. So in the new regulation, there is the need to establish a list of antimicrobials for which a cascade should be banned or restricted. I think that we are very aware of the situation in the different countries for some species, and I think also that the European Medicine Agency has shown that they have done a lot of efforts to try to take into account this issue. It was the case, for example, for the maximum residue limits, to try to have something that can be extended to minor species and so on. What I can say is that we have launched last year a questionnaire on the cascade use to try to obtain more information and to fit the advice that we have to prepare. So my answer is yes. We are very well aware of the difficulties, and we have to take into account the need to treat animals, even if there are no marketing authorization for some species. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Thanks, Gerard. Answered your question, Piotr?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Danny, floor is yours.
Yeah, it's along similar lines, but it's really to address the EMA generally. You know, looking in the AMEG category D, there's lists of, you know, almost 40 antibiotics, and here in Ireland, you know, I can safely say we have only access to 10 or less of those antibiotics. For example, but as veterinary formulations, however, we can access them through the cascade on human formulations. So I would like, you know, to ask the EMA, you know, to maybe address industry about this. You know, why, you know, on the European level, if we're, you know, a single market and there's supposed to be widening of the trade in medicines as part of this legislation, you know, they need to definitely talk to pharmaceuticals about this. And also, just talking back to Christine there, you know, I absolutely agree with, you know, sometimes a short, high-dose course of a category D antibiotic can be very effective, but we've very little scientific evidence to back that up. And again, you know, I think the EMA have a role here in addressing the pharmaceutical industry about, you know, whether they would start, you know, repeating or reviewing or doing new research into course length, especially for companion animals. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's particular for Gerard or for the EMA, a comment for the EMA in general.
All right, thank you, Danny. Who of the colleagues in the panel feels most suited to answer this point? Is it Gerard?
Maybe Christian can answer.
Okay. Christine, do you want to take the floor?
Rens, this is Zoltán. I'm also happy to take this question if you agree.
I do.
Thank you. So I just would like to refer to the CVMP strategy on antimicrobials, which was published some months ago. And one of the actions is to investigate the shortage of category D antimicrobials availability. So we also, the CVMP also understands that it's something they need to work on and investigate this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoltan. Zoltan, taking into consideration that there have been asked much more questions than we can answer in the time available now, is it possible to answer them later? Is there a possibility to keep these questions?
Yeah. Yes, there is a possibility to send the questions to us, and I will mention the email address in these closing remarks, which I'm planning to.
Okay.
At the end of thank you.
That would be great. So before I hand over back to you, Zoltan, I want to thank the 6 panelists. Of course, we could have talked for much more time, which is always the case. But I thank you for bringing in your efforts and your expertise. I think you all have contributed very much to what we wanted to know. We want to have a good system to be used every day in veterinary practice, which fits with, let's say, the scientific and categorization. I think this afternoon has contributed a lot. Thank you very much. And indeed, as Zoltan said, if you want to have your question answered and it is not answered now, please can you send us an email so we can direct to the different colleagues to answer your question. Thank you very much all. And having said that, back to Zoltan.
Thank you very much, Rens. Thank you to FVE, to our speakers and panelists for their presentations and answers. And thank you also to all of you for your active participation for today's event. I would like to again take the time to advertise a little bit our infographics, which was mentioned in 2 presentations. Would like to mention that this infographic is available in 23 EU languages, and the link can be found now in the chat box, thanks to my colleagues. We hope that this session was useful for your day-to-day work. We also encourage you to follow progress of EMA's and the network's work on the implementation of the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation via the program newsletter, and we will type the URL in the event chat as well. Should you have any additional questions following the event, I just said, please email us at vetchange.program@emaeuropea.eu. The recorded session will be made available in the next weeks on EMA's YouTube channel. You may subscribe to the account to be notified once new videos are published. We wish you a lovely day. Thanks again.